time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, we managed to see one of our favourite funky bands, Chromeo, in Leeds at Project House last week. And it was fantastic. It was a really good gig. And the venue was almost ideal, really, because I've not been to many small venues that were like that. It seemed to be sort of really organised and no waiting and no lines, no British queuing involved.
I think if you go to gigs quite often, particularly in the UK, there's a lot of venues that are purpose-built, some of the newer ones, but there's an equal amount that have been about a really long time that sometimes there's certain things like leaving the venue where they're like, right, you all need to funnel down this tiny spiral staircase to a fire exit, and you're like, that's not great when there's like 1,000 or 2,000 people trying to do that at the same time. So it was really refreshing with Project House because they literally just opened some like double doors up and everybody could just get out, and you was right, you know, in the car park essentially. And like you say, getting in, there was no queues. It was the only time I've ever been at a gig where somebody around you's walked off to go get a drink and have been back like within the song.
Yeah.
You know, like, with their 3 beers, and I've been like, how on earth is this possible? Because normally, you know, people are gone for like 12 minutes.
Yeah, and particularly in some of the bigger venues, like if you're at Wembley Stadium or whatever, like I remember people, when we saw Coldplay, they'd go get a drink and they'd come back like 4 songs later, missing big hits like Yellow and stuff, and be like, what did I miss? And somebody's just like, oh, you missed Yellow.
It's hard with a band like Coldplay. You can't miss anything with a band like Coldplay.
But
all of the songs really are hits, even if they're not hits to you.
But it was really good with Chromeo. And what Chromeo had was a very, very cool light show. Like, it very much felt like Justice's light show, but like a scaled down version. And when I say that, I mean like they had a wall of moving head park hands and like spots. And they just had big like moments where everything was strobing, and it was very, very just like, considering they was working on a relatively small stage, the light show and everything they had going on made it feel massive, I think.
Yeah, and like you say about the Justice one, which is, I think it's called Woman Worldwide, and it's on YouTube. I would highly recommend watching that Justice sort of DJ set live event. It's really good.
It's not Woman Worldwide. It's a specific movie that it has a really awkward title to remember. Yeah, that's what I will say. I can't
it's
quite.
For Woman Worldwide.
Yeah.
Which is why that'll get you closer than just typing Justice Live. But yeah, I can't remember the name. It's like 4 letters.
It's like something. An Odyssey. It has Odyssey in the title, I'm sure.
Yeah,
but I can't remember exactly what it's called.
But that is a great example of, if you think about it in like movie terms, it's like what your screens represent is like a sort of CG effect. And then all your lighting, I would say, is like a practical effect. So what Chromeo was doing was saying, how can we utilize the space we have with like practical lighting? And, you know, instead of having like, they would have been able to fit one like LED panel in there, basically, like, oh, you know, like one TV's worth of LED paneling, like for a widescreen, and that would have been, you know, would have been cool. But I suppose the thing is, you're at the liberty of the, you know, of obstructions. Obviously, with it being a low ceiling height, they, you know, most people aren't going to see because all their stuff's going to be in front of the screens.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you do a lot with a little? And I think they really did do that because, number one, they'd sort of, I think the reason why you think is like Justice is because it was just the sheer amount of moving heads that were just, it's the entire wall was just moving heads.
And when you've got all the beams of the moving heads, like spotlights going round in circles, all flashing different colours at different times, it just had that same feel that Justice that Justice movie had. And with them also being like a 2-piece electronic thing, and there's moments like there's a song called Mama's Boy by Chromeo on Fancy Footwork, and it's a very like almost like a Hall & Oates ballad for the first half.
It is very Hall & Oates
on piano and stuff, and then it goes into like a really heavy guitar, but more heavy, like robot rock heavy sort of
on the
guitars.
album. It's like a 70s heavy, like a 70s R&B heavy. Like they've put some drive on it, some distortion and stuff, but it's not a metal guitar. Whereas, or it's not electronic either, like what you're alluding to. But whereas in live, it sounds like robot rock. Sort of,
it just sounds huge because you're not expecting it as well. Because they've played with the dynamics, and you've been listening to this really soft ballad, and when that first guitar strum hits, it feels like a wall of sound, and it's very, very effective. But it's moments like that with Chromeo where I was thinking, this is like as close as I'm going to get, like watching those types of, I don't want to say French house because I know Chromeo are American, and they're not even doing house really, but it just has that type of electronic sort of stuff.
It's leaning on the same musical motifs, I would say, though, especially in the more pop-orientated songs by people like Justice.
But yeah, the other thing that Chromeo did was they played a really nice, varied set list, but they played a lot of the new songs, and I'm always one to want as many new songs as possible because I'm the sort of fan who listens to the new album. So it was really nice.
People often at bands and artists on Twitter and say don't play the new songs until they're like bangers or until everybody knows them, and I always think, well, that's one way of looking at it, but it's like when we was at Slam Dunk, Pearl Waves played their new song called Perfume, and I just appreciate the fact that they did that, because now that the song's out, I can be like, in my head, I'm like, well, I've seen one of the new songs live, and I didn't expect to. So I think it's like a nice Easter egg or treat, or you could say I was there, like a bit like with the 1975 and If You're Too Shy, you can be like, I was there singing along to If You're Too Shy, because everybody knew the words even though the song wasn't out. I don't know how it happened.
It took like 4 months for it to come out as well, from after we saw it live.
It took so long for that song to come out. It felt like forever.
But yeah, it was just fantastic. And Chromeo have a really unique feel-good energy. Like a lot of bands are very playful, and a lot of bands can come off as serious sometimes. And this goes for solo artists as well, obviously. I just say bands out of habit almost 100% of the time.
Any sort of live artist, I suppose, is what you're sort of saying.
Yeah, but what Chromeo have is just that real, like, just feel good, happy energy. They're smiling, you're smiling. It's all very fun with Chromeo. The lyrics are very tongue in cheek. Everything that's happening is on stage. Is like you were saying, it's almost like watching Kiss. It's very like American. It was theatrical.
Very theatrical, considering how it's nothing. They don't have a lot to work with in Chromeo compared to a band like Kiss, but it's the way that they'd hold a pose like with the guitars. Or they do like a bit like at the end of let me remember the song name. It's the one off Juiced's album that I really like. The one about the bank. Can't remember what it's called. Bad Decision. There we go.
Oh, right.
I got there.
Yeah. I was trying to figure it out.
On Bad Decision, they elongate this like guitar and bass funky like lick thing out. But they did it like 12 times. It's like the first 4.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why it reminds me of like bands like Kiss, where they're just really, they're doing it, and a bit like John Lord from Deep Purple says, if you hit a wrong note in a solo, I'm not saying there was hitting wrong notes, but if you hit a wrong note in a solo, you just keep hitting that wrong note over and over and over again. I think this is derived from jazz performance, until the audience are convinced that you're supposed to be playing that note, because you wouldn't like triple down on it if it was a wrong note. So that's like the logic. So I feel like when they do something where they just keep playing it over and over again, you expect 4 or maybe 8, but I think they did it 12 times. And on that last like phrase of them doing it, you was like, this is just hammered into my head. But it was so funny though as well. Like there's a musical comedy in like doing music like slightly in an unexpected way can be very, very funny, because like everything about that performance was implying that section was going to last 4 or 8 bars. So to do it 12 was just like, I thought, comedy.
Yeah, particularly if you're really into music and you're thinking about it and you're counting out bars and stuff, it definitely has that thing. It's like there's a lot of musical comedy in one of Royal Republic's new songs called Electra, and you'd only know what I mean if you went to listen to it. But there's a very, very
abrupt like stab, isn't it?
Abrupt stab that commands your attention in a way where you're not expecting it. And like, I think our reaction is just to laugh when you hear things like that, because it is funny. You know, it's almost like a movie, like a comedy movie joke.
Yeah,
just in the song. But
music can be funny. That is something I think a lot of people, particularly with the advent of like 2010s, the pop music was very serious on average. Even though there was such ridiculous songs like "What the Fox Say" and stuff like that, it was like there's a deadpan to it. And I think particularly with a lot of house music, there's a very, very serious undertone, even if the song's like about love and party, and it tends to be like, well, we're serious though about this.
Yeah.
And rock and metal especially has gone that way. You know, it used to be like citing bands like Kiss, bands like Cheap Trick and stuff. The songs used to be very funny overall.
And this is what we were saying about Def Leppard's new song, Just Like 73, where the chorus is so, I don't want to say brain dead, but when you read it out, when you think about what the chorus is,
they
vocally,
don't do lyrics like that anymore.
They just don't. You're not used to hearing lyrics like that. You get used to hearing the same word over and over again, or the same line like 16 times.
Yeah.
But there's something about the slapstick nature of Just Like 73 that I was laughing the first time I heard it, because as soon as you heard him say, I want to rock with you just like 72, you're going, 72, the song's called 73. And then you're going, oh, I know where this is going. And it's just funny. It's funny to me. But
well, because not only is it the rhyme it's like two,
it's you and two, then it's me and
three.
Three. Yeah.
But like you said, because it starts on 2, and the song's called 73, there's a double like expectation. And that's what, it's like the tease and release thing that they say in music about, teeing up something. And even first listen, the audience is expecting something. And that's why music can be so funny, because if you tee up something and then either avoid it, or it like goes on too long, or whatever it is, it can start to be very funny.
But the thing with that Def Leppard song as well is that's like, a lot of the Def Leppard songs have been really good, a lot of the new ones, but I've listened to that song like 10, 12 times since it come out, like in 4 days, because I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting Def Leppard to put out a new song.
No, they didn't seem to allude to anything.
And then the song was very like 70s glam slapstick, but I've just really been enjoying it. And Tom Morello does a good solo on that as well.
Is there a version with Tom Morello and a version without Tom Morello?
Yeah, there is on the
That's
vinyl.
Interesting.
So I imagine the album might have not Tom Morello. But yeah, back to Chromeo. The thing that a lot of the American bands do is they have a way of stage presence, like a way about conducting themselves on stage that the English bands just don't seem to do. Maybe because English bands are a little bit more self-aware in the sense that they don't want to look uncool or like they're forcing anything. The American bands are like, right, we've got to hold the pose, we've got to get the crowd to do this. We want interaction in a way. I think a lot of British bands, they do want interaction, but they're maybe not as full on with the way they're going after it.
I think in America there's still that showbiz thing, that Elvis or performance-based thing of, we got to bring a show. And in England, and I think a lot of Europe, it's more, there's a modesty thing of, we're going to play what we play, and we're going to see what the audience does. And we can be grateful for the applause, and we can, steer into it. But, a lot of English bands aren't going to demand that applause in a way that is traditional, like I think the American bands do. Where, like you said, just the way that Dave Warren was just holding his guitar in the air and he just just sort of trying to make eye contact with as many people as possible.
Even though he's wearing sunglasses, which is always funny to me.
That's part of the comedy, wearing sunglasses indoors. It's just so funny. But that I feel like is part of the show. Everything's part of the show with Chromeo.
Yeah, because they look like you expect them to look before they even get on stage, But
it's also the fact that P-Thug only talks with the vocoder. Even when he's thanking the audience, he only talks with the vocoder, and that's part of like the full showbiz persona, which I think, there's not enough of that sometimes. And, you know, it's not appropriate in every genre. When you're doing like the stereotypical authentic rock or authentic like piano pop and solo artist stuff, I get that that isn't as much of a thing because it doesn't really mesh with the type of music very well and the overall image. But I think, you know, I think of bands like ZZ Top where just the overall visual look of them is so over the top.
I think like a lot of people in the UK would say gimmicky.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, it can be seen as gimmicky. But I think there's something about looking at a band like ZZ Top and going, even silhouetted, I know exactly who that band is.
Yeah.
Just from everything about them, from what they're wearing to the look, the style that they present themselves with.
But I would say it's like a moderation thing. Like if everybody is like their images, I'm authentic, I'm a real artist, then it's less meaningful. Whereas if you have bands who are just as authentic, but they have no, I don't know, like they don't need to prove they're authentic. It's like Chromeo make these absolutely banging funk songs and they play everything and they just, you know, they write it mostly themselves, I believe.
They
and
produce a lot of their own stuff.
Yeah, produce a lot of their own stuff and they have their own studio and they're not out there trying to prove that they're authentic because they don't need to. They know they're authentic, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And then there'll be bands out there that are like trying to look overly authentic and they didn't write the songs and they didn't play most of the instruments that they do on the video, if you know what I mean. And there's like I don't know, there's a disconnect where it's like, yeah, you can brand yourself as authentic, but it doesn't mean that you actually are.
This is what a lot of people get upset about with like major label artists and like solo artists, where they're trying to hit home this really authentic narrative in a song. And you look at the credits and it's like Max Martin wrote the song.
Yeah, it's like written by like a big people. Name songwriting like team, and then it's produced by Max Martin. You know, it'll be mastered at Sterling Sound or Metropolis, which again, mastering doesn't affect authenticity, but it's one of those where if you're gonna get all the names on there, you know, you might as well. And then, like you say, it's not even like I feel sorry for if they're co-written. I think there's a real nice middle ground with the co-writing because that's like a big thing at the moment. Is saying, look, I'm gonna, you know, branch out and not just write for me because some people writing songs is quite difficult. And also, I imagine if you're somebody, say like Taylor Swift, writing every song without anybody else to bounce off must start to get a lot. When you've written that many songs.
And it's like Bon Jovi, I think, on the documentary they talk about the partnership with John Shanks and stuff. And I think it's just about having a lot of people in the room to say, guide or confirm good and bad ideas where they're not entirely sure. Because I think if you did have, for anybody who's never had like a big audience, if you knew that like 3 million people was going to buy your CD as soon as you put it out.
It's not just the buying, it's the criticism of it as well.
I think you would be a little bit more guarded and you'd want as many people on your team to be advising and know, like, is this good? Does everybody around me think this is good? And this is where people have like a lot of yes men around, and then it starts to go wrong. But that's the philosophy: is if 10 people's checked it, then surely all 10 people can't be wrong. But we've all seen adverts where hundreds of people at a big tech firm will be going through, or like McDonald's or whatever, and then you look at the advert and everybody who watches it goes, ooh, I wouldn't have done that. That's not a good advert. And then they pull the advert and you go, just because you have hundreds of people to say, is it a good idea? Does it work well with an audience demographic? Doesn't mean you'll be right.
It's the same. Most recent example of that is the Apple iPad advert, which got pulled after. I saw it once on YouTube and it was pulled, I think, before I saw it again. The one with the giant, it's a pneumatic press, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where they squeeze all this vintage stuff down. And if you wasn't aware of that happening, basically, they take loads of. Basically, most of it is the arts. It's games. Like there's a Space Invaders like actual arcade cabinet that you actually see. Like a lot of it, it's implied that it gets crushed. You literally see the pneumatic press crack the top of the Space Invaders cabinet.
You see it bend like trombones and
there's
trumpets and brass
guitars.
instruments. Yeah,
there's
pianos,
everything that you can think of.
Well, the art stuff, they have like a canvas and some paints that get squeezed.
Yeah, an easel isn't the end of the world. Compared to like the amount of work that goes into making like an artist's like easel and canvas to making a Space Invaders cabinet that is no longer in production is, it's different. But I do think personally it's like the Space Invaders one will have been the one that really ticked off a lot of people just because it's so rare, it's so out of circulation, but it's still very desirable, and people like the history of it. Like gaming's bigger than ever. So the point is that got such a negative reaction because there was also like, why have anything when you can have an iPad? That might as well have been the slogan.
Yeah.
Why enjoy any form of other media when you can just sit with an iPad and use that?
It's hard for artists and bands to get that, to go that wrong with a song.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think of if anybody has released, I mean, apart from like the Drake versus Kendrick Lamar feud where people are actually pulling music and apologizing for it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know enough on to make a comment, so I'm not. Well, I have who I think's winning, but I'm not going to comment on it because I've only heard one song, and then everything else I know is from what other people said, so I don't know enough about it. But that's like the only thing I can think of where people are putting out songs very quickly, and then the audience is going oof, and then they're pulling the song.
I think a lot of the examples for music is album artwork. There's a really good one in the Bon Jovi documentary where they had to change their album artwork. Like Steel Panther, for example. I mean, they obviously walk the line. They're a comedy band. If anybody is aware of Steel Panther and doesn't like them.
I think a lot of people don't realise they're a comedy band.
They are a comedy band. They never pretended there wasn't a comedy band, but they got in hot water for some of their guitar, their effects names in the, I believe it will have been the TC library, the tone print format. They got in trouble for their names, particularly when another artist who is a tone print artist saw one of the names and said, no, thank you. And that unfortunately, this is the reality though, that spawned Steel Panther doing an extremely successful line of physical pedals.
Oh yeah, because a lot of people wanted them to do more,
multiple hundreds of pounds and dollars per pedal. And the tone print was like free, I believe. If not, it wouldn't have cost more than like 99p. So that mistake, that pushing of the envelope, actually resulted in them having a successful side business, which is just the opposite effect of, and I can't remember which was the artist who had complained about it. And they had the right to complain about it. I mean, I could see what, like when you're a fan of a band like Steel Panther and you understand what their brand is, and you have to put yourself in the mind that the things in the songs are jokes. It's like going to see stand-up comedy. You wouldn't walk out of a Dave Chappelle show and say what he says on stage to somebody on like a bus. Seriously, you wouldn't do that. So I think you wouldn't do that with a Steel Panther concert either.
Steel Panther as well is that they're the sort of band where you have to be mindful of where you're listening to them.
Yeah, you definitely do.
And what you're listening to, because they are like what am I trying to say?
Controversial.
I was going to say then I didn't know what I was going to say. But yeah, they're a controversial band for obvious reasons. It's that sort of thing. And in all fairness, like Chromeo have songs that can be taken that way if you're not really listening to the lyrics. Like old 45s and stuff, they all have like lots of funny like jabs of stuff about how people should look and what you need to be wearing, because that Chromeo's full brand is like high heels as well.
Yeah.
But
again, this is what we're sort of doubling back ground to, is that the music, there's supposed to be comedy and music, or comedy and music have been paired together for so long. I do feel like now it's like more difficult. It's more difficult to make a song that's funny or a song that's ironically funny. It's a bit like what Porter Robinson's doing on his new stuff as well, like very provoking lyrics and some very
detrimental.
Detrimental?
Referential. He's referencing Pitchfork doing articles about
No, it's self-referential.
Which is quite interesting.
The word that I'm looking for a specific phrase that I can't think of. It's the self-whatever one. Where it's like self-inflicting, like the humour on. I know the word. It's very close to all three of the words, but it's not quite that word. But you know, that's what I mean. It's like a lot of music has comedy in it, and sometimes, as you were saying, I mean, churches, they have that song. Thank you, Mac, for jumping, Mac. What's the song?
Which song do you mean?
Not Good Girl, the other one.
Oh,
where she hits her face.
He said, she said.
He said, she said. Yes, that one where she smacks her face into like a row of paint or whatever it is. That one has very, very much the same thing of sort of going through like the sort of experience of a woman
will say to women,
that are contradictory to what men will do, and you know, it's like it's comedy in there, but even though there's pain in them lyrics too, but it's like, you know, what I'm saying is music and comedy, stand-up comedy by U2.
It's always tough to try and talk around it because you only can think of what you can think of at the time.
It's trying to thread the examples from your head, like, without having it all written down.
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously all the songs are written from different places. Some people are talking about life experience. Some people are talking about online experience. And yeah, it depends if it's coming from a good place or a bad place, you know. But what Chromeo are really good at doing is coming from a good place with all of it. That's why I really like Chromeo, and all the lyrics are very funny. And if you want a stupid song, just listen to Legs by Chromeo and Chuck English, because that's just, I can't believe they got away with just having a chorus that just says legs.
It's so funny. It's funny, but it's like you say, tongue in cheek is how you describe it with Chromeo. It's not the same as Steel Panther, where Steel Panther is very much a
vulgar. They're a vulgar
band.
Yeah.
Or like The Lonely Island is also a similar thing, where it's sort of comedy. There's a hierarchy of bands that are funny and comedy that is music.
I suppose
there is some overlap where some of the bands are right in the middle of, is it that the band's funny, or is it that two comedians or like a group of comedians have made music? Like which one is it? Because some of them really do walk the line.
Yeah, I think the thing is a lot of the examples we're talking about are relatively tame in comparison to what you hearing like hip hop at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the hip hop songs that I hear, some of them are very like in your face, extremely vulgar, because that's always where hip hop's been, you know. But I don't listen to a load of hip hop, so I'm not pulling examples from that genre.
That's why it's so funny that people get so mad at Steel Panther.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Like hip hop music and rap music sort of go way harder than Steel Panther do for the most part.
Yeah, I think Steel Panther embodies the entire image, but in a way where maybe they're getting at people who are a little bit less accepting of using that kind of language. Whereas I think in hip hop, it's generally more tolerated because that's where it started. Do you know what I mean? That's where a lot of that type of language found its way into hip hop very early on, because hip hop is all about talking about the truth and what is happening.
Yeah.
Whereas rock is very much like, I'm a celebrity. Like, particularly when you think about 70s and 80s.
When it's going through the 80s
I'm a celebrity, you know. And it's like the two sides of the same coin. You're like 80s metal and hip-hop. You're like, in what they mean. Because they're both singing about, we've got a private jet, we've got girls, we've got drugs. But it's a very different way of telling that story.
Yeah.
Between those two genres. But yeah, it's interesting to think about lyrics and the way songs are and the way certain bands cover certain topics, because you have bands and artists that would do a song that other people just could never do. And that's what makes music so fun. Like, you think about Chromeo, right? And Chromeo sort of have a brand and a full like identity that I can't think of another sort of act that has the same type of thing, like between the melody, the two in the actual band and they're like characters, they're like stage personas.
The closest thing you could possibly get to Chromeo off the top of my head would be like Bruno Mars' 24 Karat Magic, just because there's a lot of humour in that album and there's talk boxes and it's funky, it's synth and funk.
Yeah,
like that is the backbone of that sort of that it's not space funk, is it, when it's so electronic? I'm not sure what you call it, but the funk music that really leans on synths and drum machines. But
it's also like the pop funk as well, because it's very easy to get into like the really funky funk.
Like jungle boogie.
But also like from a modern lens as well, because it's more like with the EDM production, isn't it? I mean, Silk Sonic less so, but they've still got that modern production. It's having everything very in your face, whereas a lot of the old records, due to just when they come out, they are like soft on the drums. You know, the drums don't hit hard, and I think that's where you get like a lot of comedies that everything hits so hard in like the newer songs. So when they do a one stop or one drop, it really hits hard. You know, particularly when you're watching it live. That's been our thoughts on one of my favourite bands, Chromeo. Really glad to have seen them live finally, because it was the first time they played Leeds in over 10 years, they said as well. Yeah, there was a very interesting tangent where they basically said that their tour organisers were like, don't bother playing like Leeds and all the other middle dates. just hit London, Manchester, Glasgow or whatever. And there was like, no, we're going to hit the small venues, which I think was a nice sentiment. But yeah, do you think music and comedy go together as well? Maybe that's one to let us know in any comments. That's sort of where our podcast went in that direction about halfway through, didn't it? Yeah. Right. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.